Hey, I'm Stephanie, and it's time to talk about makeup. Welcome to Makeup Monday. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the items in my current 22 in 22 project pan that's really inspiring me, but it's also leading to temptation when it comes to some of the new makeup releases out there. Because I am currently on a low buy and I do not want to purchase any new makeup this year, I thought I would try to distract myself from temptation by playing with some of the things that I already own. So, if beauty and style content that focuses on gratitude and taking joy in a lot of what we already have sounds good to you, then I hope you'll consider liking this video and subscribing. Here is the item that inspired today's journey. It is a single eyeshadow that my mom gave to me on my last visit home. It's an Estee Lauder Pure Color eyeshadow in the shade Iris Pearl. And it's basically an iridescent satin with a lilac base and a periwinkle sheen. So it's very Pantone color of the year 2022. The reason I put this in my project pan is because I wasn't even sure if I could pull off a color like this. I tend to wear a lot of neutrals or warm leaning colors, but I've never really tried wearing cool tone colors like this with a white base. I have been wearing this since the beginning of March, and I was really surprised at how much I'm enjoying it. And it made me remember all those times in the past where I've gone on a search for a really good pastel palette to try, but I never really found one. I tried a couple from the drugstore that were just really disappointing. I think one of them was from Makeup Revolution, and you couldn't even see that shadow no matter what you did. You used a brush, nothing. You used your fingers, nothing. You'd get more color on your eyelids if you thought really hard than if you used that palette. So it was really, really tragically disappointing. And then I tried one from Lorac. My mom has it. I think it's called the I Love Brunch palette. And I have to say, Lorac finishes are really finicky for me. I just don't get along with them all that well. And so I wasn't really happy with that one either. So I kind of gave up. But then this shadow reawakened my passion for pastels. And just as that happened, lo and behold, both Hindash and Natasha Denona both released pastel palettes at the same time. And I am familiar with both of their formulas, and I really enjoy them. So part of me was kind of tempted to take a trip into town to see if I could get my fingers into some swatches. But I didn't, because I had no other reason to go into town and I really didn't need to tempt myself. So instead, I thought I would revel in the beautiful eyeshadows I have at home, and I decided to see if they could maybe satisfy my penchant for pastels. If you watched my latest low buy update, then you might remember that I said I didn't think I had any pastels in my singles collection, but I was looking through them and it turns out I was kind of wrong. I have more pastels than I thought, which is really exciting. I think the reason I wasn't thinking about them or I didn't remember them is because I tend to pair them with grungier colors or I use them in different contexts. For example, I really love this Natasha Denona Trio Chrome palette, but I think what happens is when I use this palette as a standalone palette, I tend to focus on these grungier Trio Chrome shades. And so even though I'm pairing them with pastels, the ultimate feel of the look is much dirtier. And I don't tend to think of pastels as dirty or grungy colors. So I didn't think of them as pastels, which maybe shows the limits of my intelligence. Or maybe it's insidious marketing. Let's go with that. It's marketing's fault. So I have pastels. But there are several shades that I had in mind that I simply don't have. And for some of the other shades that I had in mind that I do have, I only own them in a shimmer formula. Now that's not tragic, but my slight disappointment at that realization does tell me something. It made me aware of the fact that what I'm actually lusting for is to try a really good matte pastel formula. So today, I thought I would try to build my own Monochromance palette using what I already have here, because that is an all-matte palette. Now, I know that building your own palette is not an original idea. I'm probably the millionth and one person to do this. But what I always think is cool when I watch these series is when people think of their own snappy names for it. Some people just use the hashtag BYOP, which is very cool, but hashtaggery is a bit too hip for me. I've never been with it, so I don't think that fits. I think it was Hannah Louise Poston who originally started the Duping the Vibes kind of thing. And that is like the perfect title for something like this. But I mean, she's a wordsmith, so of course she's going to think of the perfect title for something. But I thought I would say that I am covering this palette because I'm a musician. And if you've ever watched my music YouTube channel, then you might know that I write my own material. But every once in a while, I cover songs from other artists. So today, I would like to cover Monochromance by the artist Hindash. The first thing I did was to pull out all of the palettes I own with removable shadows, mostly my singles palettes, and I focused on the ones that I thought would have pastel colors. As I plucked those shadows for my composition, I had both the Monochromance palette and the Natasha Denona palettes at the back of my head as inspiration. Once I had all of the pastel and pastel-adjacent shadows on the table in front of me, I separated out the mattes for my Monochromance palette. And here's what I came up with. It's not like 100% one-to-one the Hindash palette, but I think it's close enough to help me figure out what looks I would create if I actually had his Monochromance palette. I had a couple of things in mind when I was choosing these shadows, and one of those was the formula. I own Hindash's Beautopsy palette, and the shadows in that palette are very finely milled and extremely soft. So that means it's very easy to get very soft, blown-out looks with that palette, which is why I really like it. And so I wanted to make sure that I kind of got as close to that formula as I could with this because not only are the colors important to me, but how I work with them would be important. So I tried to keep it that way. And that's why I have a lot of Viseart and Natasha Denona shades in here because I feel like they most easily give me that effect. They feel very different. The formula is nowhere near the same, but I feel like the end result is similar. So that's why I tried to focus on those, but I didn't have Natasha Denona or Viseart shadows in all of those colors. So like this one's from Urban Decay, this one's from Too Faced, this is a Lethal Cosmetics shadow, and these two are from ColourPop. So it's like a very high-low kind of palette. But I mean, you know, I needed the colors too. So I think this was like the best compromise for everything. When it came to the purples, that was actually like, I made sure to focus on the formula here because I had a lot of purples, like a surprising amount of potential purples for a selection. And I ended up choosing a color that's slightly warmer than the one that Hindash has in his palette. And the reason for that is because the formula in this case was just much more important to me than the color. And if it were any of the other shades, I might not have thought the same way, but this is the shadow that inspired this all. And this is, I feel like, relatively close to the tone of his light purple in his palette. And I already know that I like this. So I don't need to test out whether I like this cool toned purple or not. I just need to test out whether I like the kind of pastel idea in a softer formula. So that's why I chose these two particular purple shadows. When it came to these teals, they're a little bit more green than what he has in his palette, but I just don't have any pastel blue shadows. So I had to kind of go more green. But, you know, you're just using what you have and you do the best that you can. And this is what I came up with. So it works. And like I said, the whole point of this little exercise is to see what kind of looks I would create if I had a palette like his. And now I do. So I feel like I hit the mark close enough. To be honest, when I first saw this, I was a little intimidated by it because even though I have owned and used each of these individual shadows, I've never seen them in the context of this color story before. And so when I saw it, I was like, okay, now I have it. What am I going to do with it? So I decided I would try the look that I first imagined when I kind of daydreamed about owning the Monochromance palette. I was intrigued by the teals in that one, so that's what I used today. Both of these shades happen to be from ColourPop. The light green is from the Baby Yoda palette, and the dark teal is from the It's a Mood palette. They're not as finely milled and soft as some of the other formulas in here, but they did a solid job. And I had the feeling that I ended up with a look that echoes what I would have done with Monochromance. And that has been what has been on my eyes throughout this video as well. I did add the shimmer shade Silk Teddy from Too Faced over the top, but that's something I do to like any matte look if I want to up the shine. So I think it's a realistic reflection of how I would use the Monochromance palette as well. So I am really looking forward to using this and seeing what kind of looks I would actually come up with if I had the Monochromance palette. However, I do think I am going to add this white shadow to the palette, even though there's not a white in the Hindash palette, simply because some of these shades aren't quite as pastel as I wish they had been. And since pastels are usually white based, I figured maybe having a white shadow in there could help me add to the pastel vibes of this palette. So I'm going to stick this in there. And that, my friends, is that. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a wonderful week and that we can all remember that even stumbling can be a form of moving forward. So let's stumble in style.